a world where all of the oceans are made of like spores that come from moons? Okay, this is going to be interesting. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, which is the Secret Project book #1. Originally, I told myself I was going to wait until I got the physical copies of these to read them, and yeah, that was probably never going to happen, but I was excited to get to it right away. So after Lost Metal really was a lot better than I expected and kind of revitalized me and had me ready to go for more Cosmere, I was pretty excited to see what we had here. At the same time, I know that the secret projects are kind of different and not normal things, so I feel like I had very managed expectations. And so I didn't really know what to expect with this story, but it was overall pretty fun. Definitely not, like a core Cosmere novel, but it was interesting and fun. So this one, we start with Tress, who lives on the rock, and she's from a poor family. She collects cups, but her and the son of the Duke have fallen in love, basically, until he's taken away, and then she goes on to try to mount a rescue of him. It's done in a very fairy tale kind of format, and with that, especially the first half, very, very whimsical and kind of light with the tone and the way everything's done. There are so many puns in this book, which to me is definitely a positive for the record, because I like puns. The puns and the wordplay I thought were pretty fun here. Sanderson definitely doing a lot more than normal, because this book is narrated by Hoyd, and so it's Hoyd throwing in what all of his clever jokes, some of them which are just terrible, but that's kind of half the fun of it, at least for me. And there are jokes kind of at the beginning, too, about how it's always the fair maiden who needs to be rescued and whatnot. And so it's kind of a play on a very fairy tale where, the prince has to go rescue the damsel, and instead it's Tress who is going to try and rescue her prince, basically. Not actually a prince, but you know what I mean. And because it's the Sanderson book, and it is technically a Cosmere novel, there's got to be some sort of weird magic system with it. And so what we end up getting, and keeping spoiler free at this point too, is we're on this world where there are, I think it was 12 moons, and these spores basically rain down, and they react with water, and the oceans themselves are made with spores, and you kind of find out more about them as you go along. But it was pretty unique in the way that it was done, and definitely made it very interesting, especially parts that involve seafaring. It's really, really different when you're sailing on literal clumps of spores, basically. And so kind of the explanation there I thought was pretty cool. And overall, like I said, very whimsical fairy tale kind of thing. Now, that's not really my thing so much with it, but I think it worked pretty well here, with being the story as told by Hoyd, and also because it's Hoyd, you get a lot of different Cosmere nods and just like weird little references and that kind of thing as well, which I also thought was interesting. So that's where you parts of this, besides like the magic system, don't feel like it would actually be Cosmere relevant. Hoyd has told some weird stories before, but this being like a full-length story Hoyd is telling, and who knows, he's not the most reliable, maybe he's embellishing things, but we do get some Cosmere nods, which I think are very intentional, and so that's definitely one of the things that made it interesting, is getting those kinds of Cosmere nods. So overall, I thought this was pretty fun. I wasn't mind blown by it. It came out to about a 3.5 because I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. My main complaint is it did that kind of fairy tale thing where at the end we just kind of off screen, like, and then all this happened, and now everything's blah, 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 that kind of thing. It is very different in some ways. I'm not going to, like, spoil the end, but I just, it did some of the final things off screen, and so I'm not confirming whether it's happily ever after or not, but it's just, a lot of fairy tales will kind of do that, where it's like, okay, we're trying to get from A to B, and then the story is A to B, and then all of a sudden we're just gonna like skip B to C and just go straight there. And it did that a little bit, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think part of that's just the format. So I was like, that was a little underwhelming. But overall, like I said, I thought this was pretty fun. Is it a must read? Not necessarily, but I think most people, as long as you have reasonable expectations here, will enjoy this, especially if you're going and looking for what it is. I think people who are more into the kind of whimsical fairy tale thing especially will enjoy it. You get a lot of that first half, and then the second half, it's not nearly as like whimsical and whatnot, and it's more, we're focusing more on these characters, learning about the world, the magic, and that kind of thing. So there's still plenty of that. But weirdly enough, even though I'm not a fairy tale person, the first half, the very whimsical fairy tale part, I really enjoyed that. And then things got more interesting as we went along, but it almost like lost something from not keeping the whimsy, which is weird to hear myself saying, but it is what it is. I do want to jump in and talk some spoilers for this book, just because, like I said, there are some really interesting things, I think, as far as Cosmere connections, so we're going to chat on those really quick. So if you haven't read it, obviously, don't watch this. As well as, I'm going to be talking general kind of Cosmere things, so if you're not, like, up to date on the Cosmere, maybe don't watch this part either, because I don't want to spoil anything from, like, other Cosmere-related things. So you have been warned. Let's jump into some spoilers. So the first part is... we learn that these spores are related to the Aethers. This is not actually the world where the Aethers come from, we learned through the story, but there are the different Aethers that are like on the moons, and that's what's causing the kind of the weird magic system. And I didn't want to get into too much detail, because some of that is, I think, very purposely not revealed till later, but you have like the verdant spores that grow vines, you have the crimson ones that are spikes, and then you have the midnight spores that are used to create midnight essence, which we've had mentioned a couple of times before. So even though this isn't like the original Aether planet, where we'll eventually, I think, get a story from, it was just really interesting to see it more in action, especially because we saw some of the, Aether-related things being used in... I literally said it earlier in the video, the last Era 2 book. The Lost Metal. Oh my gosh, I'm like, I just said it even. So it was kind of interesting to see more of that in action. And then as we get further and further in, we also get more and more hints that at least, whereas Hoyt is telling this and where the story takes place is in Space Age for the Cosmere. So this is probably... the latest, or one of the latest things. I think the only thing that could possibly be around the same time is Sixth of Dusk, but I'm pretty sure this happens after Sixth of Dusk, because the AVR all are also briefly mentioned, so it would feel like, that has already happened, where Sixth of Dusk, at that part, since that one takes place so late in the timeline too. So, just getting kind of a glimpse at Space Age Cosmere, and granted, we're on a not very advanced world for this, so we're not getting to see that directly. More so we see it through things Hoyd's talking about, things he says and does. He makes a lot of references that sound very much like they're like very modern, like, our world kind of things, which to me isn't, at all saying like, our world is now part of the Cosmere, just that at least some of the planets or the peoples of the Cosmere have advanced far enough to have very modern things, like we would think about today technology-wise. And so that part was pretty interesting. But it's also, at the very end, at least, and I don't know how much we're supposed to rely on it, but the picture of the spaceship that the Sorceress uses, and Sorcerers having like laptops and lighting like an office building and all that kind of thing. It didn't look that advanced, so this also could be very early Space Age. And so begs the question, have the other people that visited for the most part, how advanced are they? But there's reference to people from Nalthis coming from the sky, so I also assume via a spaceship going that way. And we have some other advanced things. There's like a throwaway line about, like, that's Nalthian, what is it, predictive circuits or something. So once again, we get some things kind of throughout that lead us to show us we're in the Space Age, but pretty interesting because we just haven't really seen that. So it really kind of starts to show what it would look like when different peoples of the Cosmere have space exploration. And so knowing Nalthis has it, we know with Era 4 Mistborn is going to be Space Age, so there's going to be people from that planet obviously going to be having it too. So kind of seeing and wondering what happens there was pretty interesting. We do have, of course, a Khandra on the ship as well. And references to them being released by Harmony at some point and just kind of going off and doing their own thing. As well as just the bits and pieces we see with Hoyd and what his design there is. And the fact that he was trying to become an Elantrian, basically, and get access to Andor, which is a magic system, we obviously haven't seen him get before, kind of continuing his thing where we've seen him in some of the other books collecting all of the different magic systems, like Allomancy. He collects, we know he has breaths, things like that, so kind of doing all of those different things. And so it was interesting to see that and also know that it's taken him that long to get to that part. And we also see the sorceress who, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she's part of the Irie, which is like the group of Elantrians who we saw in Secret History. And the fact that she not only obviously has her Andor powers, but she also has light weaving, and she also had other powers in there as well. So she's able to do several different bits of the power. She had awakening and light weaving and her Elantrian powers. So it starts to beg the question of how many other people out there are going and collecting all of the different kinds of magic, basically, in order to use. How powerful are these people? Because we also see for the first time in this book a dragon, and we've known that. I was talking to somebody in Discord. I think it's Cultivation who's a dragon, or one of the shards, one of the female shards is a dragon. And so we know there are dragons that come from Yolen, and I think some that were involved with the Shattering of Adnalcium, but we've never actually seen one. So getting to see a dragon and see this other powerful magic user, and it just starts to beg the question of how powerful are these people, and knowing that Hoid is not the only one who's going around doing this. We knew there were other world hoppers, but kind of seeing this far ahead and the advances that some of these people are, I thought was really interesting as well. So those are some of the big pieces. There was also a throwaway line that's made by Tress, talking about even if Death shows up with nails in his eyes, which seems to be quite an obvious reference to Iron Eyes, which begs the question, how do they know that? And is that like Hoid slipping in, changing it, because Hoid would be aware of that? Or have stories move that much? Is there that much kind of movement between, or was he there, So there's a lot of questions, but this kind of also just threw out a ton of Cosmere-related lore, basically, and so I feel like you get your whimsical fairy tale, and then you get your Cosmere lore sprinkled in throughout in a fun way, so there were so many interesting things. I'm probably forgetting some, just because there were a lot of little references like that, but just some of the things that opens up, especially as we get closer and closer to, or further along in the timeline advancing. It's just going to be, I think, really interesting to see what all else we see in general. And we did see, too, one thing I think is kind of cool, because even with, like, the space age, I'm assuming there's going to be some, but, like, in Era 2 Mistborn, we see, like, the flying ships. They aren't just normal flying ships. They also use allomancy in order to fly. And so kind of trying to see how both the magic systems and technology are going to intertwine. And so seeing the robots that were awakened, basically, and there's even a comment that an awakened mind basically is better than a computer on its own. So it gives kind of a whole new thing to like AI and that kind of thing, if you have really advanced techniques like that. So the idea of seeing the magic intertwined with the technology is something really interesting. We got a little tidbit of that for the most part, was really it, but just the implications that stuff like that's going to be coming, especially from Nalthis, where they can awaken machines essentially in order to do certain things, is pretty cool, and I'm really interested to see where the rest of that goes. So those are generally my spoiler thoughts. Overall, like I said, I do think this was a fun book. I enjoyed my read. It got through pretty quick. I know some people got through way quicker than I did, but I enjoyed this. I wasn't really sure how I was going to feel about these secret projects just because they're kind of out of the norm. Like I said, I'm not much of a fairy tale retelling kind of thing, but this was more like a tongue-in-cheek. It's at the back of the book, he compares it to The Princess Bride and said it was kind of him going for that kind of thing. And I think it was Treebeard in Discord, I'll link him, he did a review for this too. He said it kind of felt like The Princess Bride meets Stardust, the movie, not the book. And I'm like, exactly that, yeah. And so it was just it was an interesting take. It did a lot of things, kind of throwing some of the conventions out, doing that kind of satirical telling while also having the fun whimsicalness, and also then having some pretty impressive lore dumps of Cosmere type stuff for the future. all buried throughout, and none of it made super obvious for the most part. So overall, pretty fun book. I definitely enjoyed it. It's one that even if you didn't do the Kickstarter, if anything I talked about sounds interesting, definitely you can check it out. I know it's going to be released on like physical ebook and audio, I think, before too long. After the physical ones come out, I think, at least, or maybe it's just after the e-stuff's all delivered, but it's going to be coming out there, so it'll be pretty widely available here pretty soon. So definitely a fun one if you're looking for just a fun kind of different story that also gives you a lot of Cosmere stuff too. So a lot of fun there. That is it for this one, though. So let me know your thoughts if you've already read it. I know I chatted with a bunch of people in Discord, so I'm always fine to chat more too with thoughts there. Or if you haven't, let me know if you're interested in this or kind of what you're thinking about this and the secret projects in general. Always love to hear your thoughts on those things. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizardly Do It Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, any books, really anything at all. It is a lot of fun, and we would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.